Hi. Last Christmas, I spent my Christmas with my family and with a 5-year-old child. And it was a time just after the death of his grandmother, who is very, very close with. And what I had noticed was that we, the adults, were kind of pinning our hopes on him for some joy for the holidays. And there on Christmas Day, he ended up getting sick, and he was sick for the rest of the week. And at the end of that week, one night, he had a very angry, explosive outburst at his dad. And so this is what happened next. He had removed himself to another room, and he was doing something with an iPad. And I came to the edge of the room, and I paused for a moment, calmly, and then I asked him, would it be okay for me to come in the room and to sit with him? And he nodded, and he said it would be okay. So I went and I sat beside him on the couch, and I sat there for 2 or 3 minutes, simply breathing, where I felt myself regulated and calm in my own being, and just allowed my sense of regulation within my own body to be there for him to draw upon. And after a couple of minutes, I asked him, could we talk for a moment? And he nodded and he said yes. And he put down the iPad. And so the first thing I said to him was, you know, as adults, one of the things that we do is we're all whirling around like in a whirlwind. Do you ever notice that? He nods. And then I said, do you sometimes feel us all around you? And he nodded. And then I said, well, you know, when we have big feelings coming up as adults, it's not your job. It's not your job to look after our feelings. That's our own job. And he kind of solemnly nodded. And then I said, do you remember on Christmas Day? Do you remember when you got sick? And he nodded. And I said, you know, I had a feeling that maybe on that day that you were feeling us adults a little bit. And I know every one of us, myself included, that we were kind of looking to you to be a source of joy for us for that day. I don't know if you felt that at all. And he kind of nodded solemnly. And I said, so I want you to know that that wasn't your job. It's not your job to have to look after the adults. That's our job, to look after our feelings and what's going on with us. And he nodded. And then I said, you know, I think that that day when you got sick, that you were probably having your own feelings that day. And he nodded. And I said, so whatever feelings you were having were your feelings, and it was okay for you to feel your feelings. And he nodded again. And then I said, you know, I almost feel like you were doing exactly the right thing. You were doing what you needed to do, which was you needed to feel what you were feeling. You needed to step back. You needed to rest. And you did exactly what you needed to do. And then he looked at me and he nodded. So I wanted to tell you this true story of something that just recently happened. And just tell you that there were some pretty interesting things if we break that down for how to be with a child who's needing to come into self-regulation. So the first thing was, I asked for consent to enter into his space. So that gave him agency. He could say yes and he could say no. And he said yes. And then the next thing was I just, without words, we co-regulated together. And then I validated what it was that he was noticing around the people around him. Like, he wasn't crazy to notice or see those things or feel those things. Then I validated his feelings. And then I forgot to mention, at some point in the middle there, we were breathing together, and it was just simple, something simple like that. And then I let him know that it was not his fault and that it was not his job. And then we did some more breathing. And the last thing I did was I reaffirmed that he did exactly the right thing for what he needed to do for himself. That's one of the ways how we teach children to learn to recognize their own selves and their own feelings and know what to do with them when they arise.